Today's video is going to have two parts to the story. One, we've got a nasty crash and a bunch of really expensive parts to put back on here. I think I've got a few used parts that we kind of ease the bill a little bit that'll kind of help out. But I do want to touch on Stihl's price increases, which have been often and frequent, and what we've seen before, the supply shortage stuff. Typically corporations would in January and February say, whoever the lead dog was, if it was Budweiser or if it's Stihl or whoever's the leader in the industry, they would take their little annual cost of living increase and things would be pretty quiet for the rest of the year. John Deere used to do the same thing, and now it just seems like every time the wind blows, poof, here's another price increase for you. Earlier this year, and I've made a couple of videos over the years, so it's nice to be able to go back and look at those old videos and say, okay, here's what it cost in 2021, 2022, 2024. And then, so they still took a large price increase earlier this year. It was pretty significant, and it really hit hard on professional equipment. And most of the pro saws took anywhere from like $50 to $110, $20 a piece. I mean, that's, you start looking at the cost of replacement for this 500i. I don't care how many parts you have to throw at it. I mean, you're almost guaranteed to be like, well, it's all still in pretty good shape. Let's just go ahead and do it. Because the replacement costs of these are crazy talk. But I was talking with a Stihl rep, friend of mine, and I had mentioned that last price increase was super substantial. And he goes, well, you think it was bad? And I was like, well, yeah, actually, that was a pretty significant increase. And he was like, oh, no, I didn't say that right. What I should have said was, you thought that was bad. So in November, if I understand correct, we are headed for another jumbo price increase from Stihl. And we'll just have to keep an eye on that. So with that being said, we'll get into the repair of this 500i and a close look at what's wrong with it and what we can do and what has to be done, what doesn't have to be done. But if you're in the market for a new piece of Stihl equipment, I'm going to hang it out there and say you better grab your rainy day fund and get to the dealer and get something before they have new product coming in to put on the shelves that will be significantly more expensive, even though you think the prices are already outrageous. Okay, I've rambled enough. Let's dig into this victim. 'Tis but a flesh wound. All right, so obviously we're low on grip right here, and that took a little abuse. We'll get into that. You can tell that the handle's not in the right place anymore. I did notice, even though this seems to be fine, the brake handle is broken right there. So we got a new brake handle, we got a new gas tank. Luckily, he scooped up some of the pieces for the handle, because when you buy a gas tank rear handle from Stihl, you don't get any of that stuff. So I think we've got all the proper pieces and parts. Some other things we want to look deeper at, and this is one thing with these 500i's and some of the newer saws. We Stihl, in order to keep these things nice and light, use some structural webbing, maybe some thinner material. So structurally, it's okay. So if this gets hurt in the wrong way, it's really easy to break this case piece here or here. And when you start replacing case halves, you really start getting cost prohibitive, because that's a full case split. The crankcase halves are really expensive. Another thing I did not check, actually, I'm pretty sure I did. When we take this off, sometimes this breaks off right here from, the shock of everything coming down. Let me back out a little bit. From the shock of things coming down. And if this ear breaks off, there's a pin in the case right here that controls the brake handle linkage and spring. And if that's busted, you need a new case half. But so far, so good. Most of this is just cosmetic. I think I'm gonna hose this thing off. We'll strip it down a little bit. Some other details inside. The air filter housing is gonna have to be replaced. I've got one that's kind of beat up, but it's structurally okay. Uh, I made some offhanded remark to one of the guys at work at the tree company, and I said, "Hey man, how's your air filter look?" And he paused, and I said, "Never mind, you don't know." Um, this is not how. There. I just don't know if that really gives it justice. This Joker is packed, but no problem. You know, we've got a crack right there, so he needs a new one. You can clean these. Wow, look at that. And you know, you're not gonna be able to get all this out just by knocking on this. The problem is, the only thing I don't like about these filters is that the pleats are so close together that it really gets in there and gets packed. You know, I know the idea of having more pleats gives you more airflow, but you know, you'll see this thing ingested a little bit of dirt. I've said this many times. You know, you have to think about your intake right here as like a shop vac. So, you know, all this air being sucked through here, when you start packing this amount of dust and debris, you know, when you put your hand over the end of a vacuum cleaner and, you know, you get that sound. I'm not great in the sound effects department. What you'll start doing is start pulling the filter, or start filling the smallest fines through the filter material, just because there's so much vacuum pressure on this, and it's pulling it through the pleats and the weave in this. You know, you can wash these and then dry them with soap and water. That really does a nice job, and you won't hurt it. This is like some kind of, you know, plastic nylon woven material, so water doesn't hurt these. You know, Stihl says, "Oh no, don't even blow them out. Just buy a new one every 30 days." This filter base seems to be in good shape. We're gonna have to take a close look at this. I don't know if you can see that. If I can get the right angle on this, but there's some protrusion right there. You know, it just doesn't show up on camera that well. Hopefully nothing's hurt in there. Boy, I'm being awful long-winded today. This thing's definitely getting a bath before we tear into it. I mean, all the compressed air in the world isn't going to do squat. I still can't get over that air filter. I mean, you see there's still a ton of material in there. And you look at how much is on the counter. Anyway, so given how nasty this rascal is, I have blocked off the intake, the exhaust and the intake. You guys asked me about this before. I buy this just rubber mat stuff. It comes in like 6x6 squares. And those are all my block offs that I've used over the years. It's really cheap, a little arts and crafts, and it's good to go. Let me take this outside. Let's get it degreased and blown off so we can actually start swapping some parts out. Okay, that's a little bit better. You know, we got something I can work on without, you know, just tracking dirt all over the engine. You know, I've blown it off. You know, it's better. It's not, you know, it's had a wash, not a detail. But for our purposes today, to replace some broken parts, this is gonna be good. During teardown, I saw a couple things that needed to be done. This is the rim sprocket. There's absolutely, I mean, nothing left of this poor thing. You know, there's your new one. I did notice, and so all your starters are going to be pretty similar in the Stihl lineup. You see that big gap right there? And that big gap right there? So basically, the pockets on these are worn out. When we take the tension off the spring, I'm sure I'll see the same thing on the center post, where we'll have like some side to side, up and down movement, where this rope rotor has gotten larger in the center. And that's going to be a boomerang issue. So we're going to take care of the starter as well, even though it's not part of the crash problem. If you'll notice on this 500i, these don't spin around really free because there's a magneto ring of fire underneath here. So they're harder to pull over in stock form than a traditional one, where you'd only have one set of magnets or two sets of magnets for an M-tronic on the outside of the flywheel, where this has got a whole ring. So this is what it uses to make electricity to run the electronics and to create spark. All right, we're gonna try and tear this thing down, and I'm gonna talk a little bit. And I just realized, even though we're only on like the third or fourth clip of this video, but this video is gonna be a lot longer than usual for me. I try and keep them around 10 or 12 minutes. Most people don't have, oh God, still nasty. So maybe we can get a chance to talk about some Stihl prices and stuff like that. I think right now, this unit right here is at like $17.50. So, you know, I swear we're going to be, and so when you throw tax on that, you know, you're, let's see, in my state it's 6%. That's $60 on 1,000. Another half is 30. So, you know, you got $100 in sales tax on this as it is. So then you're at $18.50. I think we might even see a $2,000 after sales tax 500i in November. I mean, I really got after this thing, and you know, until you truly take something apart, you know, there's just more layers of crap. Let me get this a little cleaner so we can keep moving. Okay, I think we can, I'll bring you in a little closer. So the only thing I've done off camera is just taking the T20 screw that holds down this little bracket that holds the fuel pump and this stuff in place, and taking out. So your control module, where'd you go? This right here, where everything plugs into, tucks into this pocket. You'll have to take a black little, and this piece just snaps in right here. It's just a little trim piece, but it also works as like a hold down right here for this, along with another small T20 screw right there. And to no surprise to me, this saw, the oiler hasn't been made fully adjustable yet. I really wish the dealerships would start taking care of that. God, this thing's so nasty. All right, that'll have to be sprayed off. This is really straightforward. You know, you've got just a handful of, you know, just kind of uncluttered the wires here. Let me take the gas out of the tank. So when we start taking some of these fuel lines loose, we don't make a huge mess. You know, I so feel like, you know, I got my greasy rag out, and there, that makes me feel better. Hey Scott, if you're watching. You shouldn't, if you need to do this yourself, you shouldn't be too terribly scared of doing this. This all goes back together super nice and easy. You just need to be careful unhooking, you know, here's your impulse line, and we'll hook these back up in the same order we're taking them off. This one's got a little extra slack more than the other ones do. And these fall right like they lay. So, I mean, it's really easy to get these out. Even though these fuel lines are really well made, of good material, when you buy a tank, you get new fuel lines as a set, and you should use them. So we will do that. We'll have to, I think the only thing that we're going to have to harvest off of this poor beaten up saw or gas tank is what was it? This AV spring right here. So let me get cleaned up and we'll get the other tank ready to go. Okay, so they throw you this fuel line kit, even though the factory tank comes with that one installed. So that'll just be a spare for later. This curved one goes in right next to it. Put that on. And the one, it's got like a little lip on the end of it. That's going to go to the solenoid area. Then you got one last one that actually goes on this left side. So don't take anything loose. So this way it's easy. You're just swapping one for the next, and orient this in a way where it's going to go in that direction. Because it's going to have to plug in to the solenoid, or excuse me, the fuel injection system. All right, so old lines out of the way, new lines are installed. This can come off. You know, pulling on these is not a great idea. You want to kind of get underneath the fuel line and then kind of push it off. Sometimes you may have to actually grab a pair of pliers and rotate it to get it to break free. But, you know, just gently do this. You don't have to get all ham-handed. Take your time. So once you break that seal, you know, then this can go back in and that plugs up to right there. We'll go through all that. I'll get a little farther along. This video is getting stupid long right now. So we'll try and slap this together. I've got more cleaning to do. You know, you look at that, and this is where those two lines are going to hook up. I'll show you where that goes. But I mean, yeah, the dirt just, it doesn't seem to quit. This is the world record dirtiest fuel tank. Look at that. I mean, there's, it's like somebody put a handful in there. Here, let's take this fuel filter apart, and I'll show you how to do that. They used to sell replacement cartridges, but they don't do that anymore. They just want you to buy a new one, which is fine. You should, if you're commercially using, you know, a couple of times a year, you should change out. So this just, the cap just snaps on there, you know, so if you just get up underneath there and flip it off, and then you can reach down in here and pull that out. You know, surprisingly, you know, the nylon mesh on the outside of this is doing a good job keeping the big stuff out of this filter, but I can't imagine this thing flowing at all. But, you know, crazy talk. You know, the Germans leave you plenty of room. So this plastic shield comes off of your fuel pump assembly, and you know, there's little holes in this metal plate, and there's some, you know, little teats that will actually slide together, and then this slides into the hole. You know, that's closest, so that goes there. They give you a nice handy dandy little holder right here. They give you another little tie down right there. You know, that little wedge right there is for your wires. This will go in there after we put our module in. But if you'll just look, you'll see, and I need to rotate this just a little bit, and it gets less complicated. There we go. Because this one's a little bit longer, you know, and they correspond to left and right, left and right. Like, you can't screw that up. Well, I mean, you could if you tried, but when you look at it as you're installing, it really is the one that's on the right goes on the one on the right, and the one on the left goes on the one on the left. Next little tidbit, this will slide in super easy. They even left like a locating slide right there. If you look on the back of this, trim piece, there's going to be 3 things. So there's a lip. Oh gosh, let's set that down so you can see. So there's a lip there, a tab, and a tab. So right there, there's a lip hole for one of those tabs and a hole for the other tab. So that just sets in there and snaps in place. Your AV spring just slides in there and snaps in place. I can't tell you how wonderfully engineered the professional models are compared to other ones. Now this, I'm not going to try and do on camera, but there's a good rule of thumb. Here, let me stop right here. If you are forcing something into place on a professional chainsaw, stop, you're doing it wrong. Take a step back, take a breath, walk away from it, something. All this stuff, if you articulate this piece of plastic or this something in the right manner, it will slide in and snap in place, as long as there's nothing bent, deformed, or whatever with your part. If your part's deformed, then just, get a new one. Don't get crafty and make it work and, do the old attaboy. Just get you a new one and do it right. Let's see. This goes, oh gosh. See there? All right. Okay, that snapped into place. So now this will, oh gosh. Anyway, that's her right there. And it just, I've got a T20 screw that I can put in. Regardless, you get what I'm saying. Don't force things. Okay, so I got my 3 hoses hooked up to the 2 hoses to the fuel injector, and then my impulse line that goes to the crankcase. Pro tip, make sure those fittings are clean and dry. Use some brake clean and blow them off, so that way there's no oil. As long as they're nice and dry, then, when you put that back on, it will stay put. If there's any grease on there, it can, as the saw flexes, slide off. You see, Stihl gives you your nice little routing path, yada, yada, yada. And then, there's, everything's here for a reason. You look at this harness right here, they wrapped it. That's not to keep the wires together. That's for it to go back in here so it can be pinched and stayed out of the way. Your ignition wire, and then this one as well is wrapped, so it goes in here as well. Okay, so I mean, they're nice enough. These are color coded, so the black plug goes in the black mount, and then the blue one, oh gosh, let go there. Okay, you can't screw this up, and I think the pins are different, so even if you tried to put a square peg in a round hole, there's things in place. All right, so that's tucked in, that's tucked in. Your high tension lead is tucked in, tucked in, tucked in. All this stuff has to be tucked in, tucked in. Okay, so right there's a metal pin that goes in here that holds your trigger. So that would be right there. Oh, my greasy stuff off of there. So you want to make sure that your trigger, this isn't oriented the right way. See how there's that little hole or that little indentation area? That's where your spring needs to be. If I can flip this over, you can see that's where it catches. And there's a nice little groove. So all you have to do is lay that trigger in there. Oh gosh. And you'll see that it will line up just so, and then just make sure your spring's there. Push the pin back in, you'll have to tap it, center it, and then, we've just got throttle. This is just gonna lay in there. You'll have to put, so that's got like a little clip on the side, and that's gonna ride right there with that spring. Okay, so that's how that looks. The pin centered, that little hook goes in that little holder. The throttle rod just slides in here and goes in there. Now, that's not the one that came off of this saw. You'll notice that this one has a little bit more bend in it. Linkages can be really tricky Trying to bend this back like it's supposed to be, if you don't have one to know how much it bends and where it bends and how straight it goes, you'll never get this trigger to operate right. Just take my word for it. So, new one. Lastly, this molding cover right here, you've got a spot that it needs to go into over here and over there. And then these two forks right here will slide over that. So push forward. Oh gosh, missed it. So, oh gosh. I can't do this one hand with one hand. Anyway. Okay. That's free. You may have had some trouble getting this loose in there. You can just use your scrunch and get it in there and wiggle that back and forth until you can spread those two black forks that come down while you're wiggling up on this. So spread those out. And again, this is, there's no hardware. This is just plug it in, snap it in. Okay, so normally you can do this by just looking down through this hole right here to take the, get your oil or oil pump to, full operating. So basically, that's minimum oil and that should be maximum oil, but that should be a 90-degree turn. That's only 45 degrees because you've got this spring roll pin here. So all you have to do is take a punch, set it down, oh gosh, on top of that pin and gently tap that down until it's flush with this housing, and that way you will get full amount of oil. In this configuration, it will adequately oil like a 25-inch bar, but anything past a 25, you won't get enough oil flow and you'll start chewing up your bar because it gets too hot from not enough oil. So just super quick, that's what it looks like at full oil. That pin is flush with the bottom of the housing, and you've got your full 90 degrees worth of rotation out of your oiler adjustment. Again, you don't have to take your pump out to do this. I just took it out so you could better see what's going on. Okie doke. I think that's a really nice demonstration with all the little how-tos along the way and check this, check that. I think that's incredibly comprehensive. I've still got a little ways to go before I'm done with this saw. But, I'm probably like 20-something minutes now. I haven't added anything up. I just edit as I go. So I'll just take a short clip on my phone, start, stop. If I trip over my words, I'll just delete that and redo this process. So I'll sandwich this all together later. But I do want to talk about this price increase if you're still here at the end. So this price increase is going to be yet another, cost of living increase, and this is also going to reflect tariffs. And before anybody's feelings get hurt about, oh, the tariffs, well, they've been tariffing themselves. Like, and I'm not from Europe, I don't live in Europe, but I've heard that there's taxes, like you buy the saw and then there's like this VOC thing. I know I've got a fair amount of folks in Europe that listen and watch these videos. They have like I guess their regular sales tax, and then there's like certain items like chainsaws and stuff that they have yet another surcharge tax that they put on their own people, so before we get on that, just spread your vision out just a little bit. Even without tariffs, if you take that entire thing out of the equation, the way that these saws have jumped up, the first 500i that I bought 5 years ago for a customer, and he's like 45 minutes south of me, and he said his local dealer wouldn't order them because they were brand new and everybody had to have them because they're, cool and fuel injected and everything. He said his dealer didn't want to order one because he didn't want to have to service it, thought it was too high tech. I mean, it's a small town. And they just said, no, ain't touching it. So he said, would you do me a favor? Would you order one for me? at your dealer, see if they'll do it, because they didn't have one on the shelf. Talked to the owner, and he said, sure, absolutely. Saw comes in a week or two later. I go up there and pay for it. Call my buddy down in Lawrence and say, hey man, your saw's in. I got it all prepped and set up for you. You're good to go. I want to say I paid like $12.50 out the door, $12.75. It was less than $1,300, including tax. And now we're looking before tariffs. The saw is like $17.50 plus tax. And it's getting ready to be like more. So you just think how we got from a $1,200 saw, a $1,250 saw to a $1,750 saw. No updates, no innovation, no nothing. The only thing that changed was the price. So I'm just going to leave that there, summing this up. So if you're thinking about buying another chainsaw new, most of us buy used chainsaws, that's good. But the problem is because these saws are getting much more expensive to replace. The pain threshold to throw a bunch of new parts on there is higher, so you don't see as many nice used saws for sale like you used to. People would discard these and be like, just go get a new one. Well, now the pain of just going to get a new one's more. Well, that was an awful lot for one video. I hope you stayed to the end. And if you did stay to the end, you probably already liked and you're probably already subscribed, and I appreciate every one of you. Have a fantastic day.